Hello, good morning, everyone. Welcome to those who joined recently. Welcome to the workshop about the private finance for enabling renovation for positive energy neighborhoods, but not only, targeting vulnerable households in the residential sector. So we will start the recording soon. Um,
Yeah, I think we're recording. Good to go.
Thank you, Emily. So I will just give maybe a couple of minutes for everyone to join. Um, Welcome, everyone. This workshop is organized within the Open Lab project, and I'm Victoria Zarano from BPIE, and we have a nice list of speakers that I will soon introduce. If we can, Emily, move to the agenda part. Hello, just before we start, maybe some housekeeping rules. You can use the chat for maybe just exchanges, but for the Q&A, please use the Q&A question section for your questions. Hopefully, we'll have time to answer some of your questions at the end of the workshop. We have a panel discussion. So we have a quite full agenda. I will dive into it. So welcome, everyone. This workshop is organized within Open Lab project. I will give a short introduction soon about what it is. We have a very nice list of speakers. We have Adrien Billier from CINEA. He will talk about financial instruments for building renovation, and what is the role of the public sector to get on board vulnerable households in the renovation project. Then we'll have Christine Zhu from Bankers Without Boundaries. She will give the perspective from the financial sector on the key barriers and bottlenecks for the financial sector. And then Peter Bosmans from Vito will also give an example of on-ground project, the Henk Open Living Lab, that is a renovation project. We're renovating an entire neighborhood in Henk. So he will, as a project coordinator of this living lab, he will discuss about the issues of accessing private finance. And then finally, Borja Gumuzi from Gini Finance will present the best practice of Open Gala one-stop shop, and what financing instruments they offer based on different incomes, and what is the collaboration between the local government and the banks in Basque Country. And finally, in the second session, we will have a panel discussion moderated by Julie Emmerich from World Green Building Council, and we'll have other experts joining the panel, such as Yanika Alto. Welcome, everyone. And I will just present shortly in brief what is Open Lab project. Next slide. Next. Open Lab is a Horizon 2020 project. It's coordinated by Vito, and we're 32 partners, and BPIE is one of these 32 partners from 7 countries. So we're focusing on positive. So we're renovating neighborhoods until an ambition level that that reaches a positive energy neighborhood, positive energy balance. And we have free demonstration, free demo cases, free living labs, in very different climatic, socioeconomic, building typology contexts. One in Tartu in Estonia, one in Genk in Belgium, and one in Pamplona, Spain. So later on, Peter from Vito will give more details about the Genk living lab. Emily, I don't know, but sometimes I have interruptions of the sharing the screen. Sometimes I see your desktop. Um, Sorry for this small technical issue. Next slide, please. Yes. So as I said, a positive energy neighborhood is in our case, in Open Lab cases are renovations, but they can also be new constructions. But in this project, we focus on renovations of neighborhoods, but with this approach of offering shared services, shared spaces, shared heating system, shared PV, or like renewable energy systems, shared energy and heat storage. So I will not give the details. Peter later on will dive into this. Next slide. But there are some key principles that guide these projects. And so it's not only about renewables, even though the goal is to achieve this positive energy balance, it is achieved first with sufficiency design principles. So first we analyze, okay, which are the sharing opportunities, what we can have aggregated in mind, how we can give shared renewables, heating system storage, etc., and which spaces or assets can be also shared. And then the next step is energy efficiency. It's a deep renovation like of the building envelope. And then the final step is already in the integration of renewables, both heat and electricity, and with the not at the building or flat apartment level, but at the neighborhood scale. So again, here there are possibilities to reduce material use by having shared heating systems, shared storage, etc., and with an integrated energy management that also maybe reduces the capacity that is installed. So by shaving the peaks, etc., and optimizing the energy use. And finally, and the most important, is that these technological solutions are made in co-design, co-creation with the local community. So we engage the neighborhoods way before the renovation start, and we keep them along in all the decision making process. Next slide. So this workshop is the second workshop with the financial sector that we're doing within the project. And the first one was on the green finance, and we still have two more workshops to go. So follow us for if you're interested in the topic of renovations of positive energy neighborhoods, and especially into how to a bit enable the private finance into these projects. Next. Okay, so now I will give the floor to Adrienne Boulier. We're with.
I'm just changing the screen to make sure maybe it works better this time, but I will share again. No worries.
Okay. Okay, great. So Adrian will present the financial instruments for the residential building renovation, and a bit what is the perspective from, so Adrien Bellier is a senior project advisor at the European Commission in CINEA, and he's working on LIFE program, and he will present a bit the perspective from the public sector on the role of how to enable the vulnerable households to be part of this kind of renovation projects. Adrian, the floor is yours.
Yes. Hello, good morning, everybody from my side. So indeed, my name is Adrian Bullier, and I work at CINEA, which is the Climate, Infrastructure and Environment Executive Agency of the Commission. So we manage a number of funding programs which are dedicated to the Green Deal, and in particular, Horizon 2020 and Horizon Europe. And I work myself for Live Clean Energy Transition, which is a program which is the continuation of what was done under Horizon 2020 energy efficiency. The market uptake part of energy efficiency has pretty much moved to Live Clean Energy Transition. If we go to the next slide, just behind the lake, yes, there's so we have an open call at the moment. The deadline is on 19th of September, so that's a quick word of publicity, just to mention that if you're looking for funding to implement your projects linked to implementation of EU legislation, to breaking market barriers, changing the market, this is pretty much what we do. So we focus a lot on improving governance at local, regional, national, and European level, improving the capacities and skills of stakeholders, and mobilizing investments and improving access to finance. And this is pretty much what I focus on. We're also part of the work at European level. We were part of the Energy Efficiency Financial Institutions Group, and we will now be also supporting the implementation of the European Energy Efficiency Finance Coalition, which was launched at the end of April. So I work for CINEA, which means I don't work for DG Energy. So my presentation is not a general policy presentation, but more of a technical one. I'm not going to go into all of the details on the Energy Performance of Buildings Directive and the Energy Efficiency Directive, which include a lot of things on financing residential renovation. I'm happy to answer questions, but I may not be in the best position to answer them. So if we move to the next slide, I think as a key point of introduction, if we're talking about financing building renovation, I think the first question everybody's asking, and why you're inviting the European Commission, is, where's the money going to come from? If we look at the 2030 climate and energy objectives at the European level, we estimate that it's about 3 trillion euros that need to be invested by 2030. Now the finance gap, so a lot of these investments are just a continuation of existing investment, but more than half of it is missing. And so we estimate that only for energy efficiency in buildings, we need to increase investments additionally by 165 billion euros. So every year we need to increase by 165 billion euros. And when we're doing the accounts of where the EU funding is going, it's not always easy to identify exactly where the money is going to be going, but we estimate that between 120 and 150 billion euros are currently allocated to energy efficiency in the current multi-annual financial framework. And that includes the cohesion funds, the ERDF, for example, the recovery and resilience facilities, ETS revenues, and so on. And if you do the math, it's pretty simple. 150 over 7 years, that's probably more than 7 times less than what we need to do every year. More or less, we estimate that we need to have 80 to 90% of private financing coming in to bridge the finance gap, the investment gap for the 2030 objectives. And so the key question we need to address, and what we're trying to work on, is how we can maximize the impact of public funding to reach that goal, so to leverage in private finance. If we can move to the next slide. So leveraging private finance, I think, is really the key word. If we look at how we are going to finance the investments in building renovation, basically money can come from grants, and that's usually the case in most member states. Homeowner equity, bank loans, and then there are other non-bank entities. So it can be ESCOs, could be leasing contracts, and so on. But that's rather marginal at the moment in the residential sector. So I think the first thing I'd like to talk about is how we shift progressively from grants to loans, which doesn't mean it's an exclusive shift. It means we're changing the focus, which can be very heavy on grants, to an increasing part of investments being funded through loans. One thing that's important when we're talking about building energy efficiency, well, building energy renovation, because that includes also renewables, is that these are productive investments. So when you're renovating a building, you're going to save some energy. You may be producing energy. This has a value. This will either generate revenues or generate cost savings. And that's one way to cover at least part of your reimbursement on a loan. And I think I'd like to insist on the at least part of the installments, because we need to get away from the idea that energy renovation is going to pay for all the costs. It's not necessarily the case, but then at the moment, there's a lot of public grants, so it's also okay. But also I'd like to say, most of us don't invest in our homes as you would do on the stock market. We invest on our homes because we're looking for comfort, because a home is the image you give of yourself to your friends and to yourself. We invest also because of the long-term property value. And at the moment, we all know that the energy performance certificate has really an impact on the value of your building, and it will increasingly in the future. And if you look at the renovation market, I think more than half of that market is around kitchens and bathrooms, and nobody talks about a payback. So these investments have a payback, but do not expect it to pay for all of it. There's also, and this is why there are public grants, and there will be in the future. So I think from the European Commission side, nobody's talking about getting rid of all the grants. But the question is how we maximize the impact of the public grants. A point that's important also, because we're talking about vulnerable households. In a number of cases, those households, when they have individual heating systems in particular, tend to underheat. So you may be in cases where you're overestimating the savings, and so the payback may not be there. But then you're improving comfort, you're solving a number of health issues also, and it's social issues in general. But if we want cost savings to cover at least part of the installments, because we want people to keep the same level of disposable income, then there's two key parameters that we need to work on, and that's obviously the interest rate, but also the duration of the loan, which in a lot of cases is not so much looked at. Now, shifting to loans, we have actually several technical options which can be implemented. They can be public loans, they can be purely commercial loans, there can be public money being on lent through commercial banks. It could be a mix of many of these options. It could just be a case where you buy down the interest rate. We also have increasing interest in the idea of bullet loans, where you only pay back the capital at the end of your loan. For example, when you sell the property, or when retired people pass away, because there's a big issue for pensioners to access commercial credits. So there has been a study recently in Belgium on bullet loans. So And basically the public funding from the EU is very much adapted to implement those options. And I'm not going to go into the technicalities of how this can be done, but basically the managing authorities at national level have all the information they need to implement that. And InvestEU program is also there to support that. If we move to the next slide. So the question also is how we make it work for banks and for investors. And one thing we need to understand is that renovation loans are not really something that's attractive for banks. They're small loans, they're not secured, meaning there's no collateral on them. So, and they're hard to refinance because they're never the same. And they're also difficult for loan officer to understand. When you go to the bank and ask for a car loan, they know how to do this. Renovating your home today is still pretty new to a number of loan officers. Also because it's very technical and no project is ever the same. One thing that's really driving banks and investors at the moment is the EU taxonomy for sustainable activities. Now, to qualify as taxonomy aligned as a renovation loan, you need generally to save 30% of energy. It's not that easy to establish because we all know that measuring savings is a complicated story. And that's something that makes it complicated for banks also. And also, I would say, surprisingly, but there's still a lack of demand, and a number of banks in the past and still today are saying, well, you know, there's not necessarily as much demand as you would expect for renovation loans. For banks and for investors, mortgages are generally more attractive because they are collateralized. So meaning there's something that you can take if people don't reimburse. And that's more interesting for investors. So the risk profile is much better. But on energy efficient mortgages, which means mortgages that allow you to buy an energy efficient property, only a marginal share today includes renovation of the buildings. And that's going to grow in the future, but at the moment it's still marginal. Generally, for banks and investors, we've got an issue of transaction costs, and that's linked to the small investment size, or size of the loan, actually. So, and I think size of the loan is also determined by the percentage of grants, the public grants that are available, because if you have 80% grants, that means only 20% needs to be financed either through equity or through loans. And if we're talking about 10,000 euros, that doesn't make so much money. So a loan of 2,000 euros is a lot of work for a bank and for a homeowner. However, if you have more ambitious savings, and if you're going for a deep renovation of your building, taking you to 30,000 or maybe 50,000 euros in some cases, then the size of the loan is becoming higher, and that makes it also more attractive for the banks. When we're talking about multifamily buildings, I think one of the issues to look at is the idea of joint loans, because they're also more attractive. So if you have only small individual loans, to process them individually is not attractive and is not profitable for the bank. If you have a joint loan and you're putting together 100 people in the multifamily building, then that makes it more attractive, potentially. Generally, I think the other point that's really important is the credit risk. So for banks and investors, there's mistrust on the energy savings that will be generated through renovation for many reasons. And And the best way to, without going into all the details of why and so on, but the best way to mitigate this credit risk is to put in place guarantees and risk-sharing arrangements with the banks, and public funding, and EU funding in particular right now is very much organized so that it is possible to put in place those guarantees. And one of the points also, I think, which is important when we're talking multifamily buildings, because I understand that's one of the focuses, is if you're talking about joint loans, is the ability for homeowner associations to take loans, but that includes the legal framework on the joint and several liability of co-owners in a co-property. And I think that's quite an essential aspect in many countries where the legal framework doesn't allow this to happen. Next slide. Okay, now looking a bit at the household perspective, how do we make it work? So we're talking here about also vulnerable households, I think, without going into the details, but the latest Energy Performance of Buildings Directive really encourages member states to prioritize vulnerable households in the allocation of non-reimbursable grants, whether they're national, whether they're cohesion funds. Social Climate Fund will also be kicking in next year and even more in 2026. And that will be really allocated to vulnerable households. And generally, there's a recommendation to use revenue-based parameters when you're allocating public grants, meaning people who have low incomes should get more public grants because they have less possibilities to access private finance in particular. Specifically, when we're talking about access to finance for vulnerable households, it's very clear that guarantees will be needed. Banks are not planning to, will not be lending to people with low income unless there's a specific guarantee to cover the risk of payment default. One point which I think is very often overlooked is the pre-financing of grants. So most of the grant schemes take a long time to access the actual public money, meaning that households need to pre-finance the works. And for a lot of households, this is just not possible. If people have no savings at all, they just can't pre-finance the works. So pre-financing of grants is something that needs to be also looked at when you're looking in particular at neighborhood approaches. One point which we're pushing for very much at the European Commission, and which we are funding also largely at the Life Clean Energy Transition Programme, is one-stop shops and what we've called integrated services for home renovation. The reason why we're pushing for this is because in a lot of cases people have the money to renovate, but they don't. Not because they lack the finance, but because renovation is a complicated and painful process. And so the idea is really to try to make that process less painful, simplifying the customer experience. So avoiding, and you can see the small diagram that I put here, which is, a description of what the customer journey is, navigating between different actors which have diverging or conflicting interests makes it very difficult for households to renovate. So really avoiding the silo approach.
Adrian, just be mindful of the time.
Yeah. But so why is it important also to have one-stop shop? Is because it allows to standardize the projects and to have a large-scale approach. And if you're talking about neighborhood approaches, for example, it makes a lot of sense. And I think this is what will be presented later with Opengela. But also, if you have a large-scale approach, then you can coordinate with the banks to facilitate access to credit, in some cases to standardize the lending process. And just quickly also mentioning that banks are more and more moving towards a one-stop shop approach. If we move to the next slide, and this will be my last one, just to sum up, I think if we want to de-risk residential renovation with public funding, first point is I think we need to focus public funding on the upstream part of the renovation journey. And that to a large extent should come through one-stop shop. And one-stop shop should really focus on helping homeowners access finance and design and supervise the works, because this is often what's missing. So we should not focus just on advising homeowners what to do, but really supporting them on doing it. Non-reimbursable grants, I think, should really be based on the revenue levels. So the grant intensity should depend on your levels of income. And that includes also when you're buying down the interest rates and the pre-financing of grants. Commercial loans should increasingly be available if we're using the public funding to reduce the interest rate and also to extend the duration. And the key to that will be also for banks to get into commercial lending on renovation will be to put in place guarantees. And I think here, point of attention is that really size matters. It's difficult to put in place guarantees, which is why usually this is done at the national level because of the management costs and the complexity of those schemes. So I'll stop here and yeah, happy to discuss more. At the end of my slides, there's a long presentation of the current call for proposals for those who are interested, but you can look at that later.
Thank you, Adrian. We were foreseeing a short reaction on your talk, but let's keep this questions for the panel discussion since we ran a bit late. And so the next, it was very nice to hear from you the acknowledgement of multiple benefits of renovations, the comfort, increase in property value, and very interesting also your discussion on the aggregation, the need to aggregate investments. And I think positive energy neighborhoods indeed have this added value that they can provide this aggregation of loans. But of course, then everyone has to agree to be part of this big renovation process. And these are the issues that we will discuss later with Peter. I will now give the floor to Christine Zhu, the Executive Director at Bankers Without Boundaries. And she will present the key barriers and bottlenecks from the financial sector to invest in renovation. Christine?
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you. Thanks, Victoria. And thank you to BPIE for inviting us here today. As Victoria said, my name is Christine Zhou. I'm an Executive Director and Head of Built Environment Finance at Bankers Without Boundaries. For those of you that may not know us, Bankers Without Boundaries, or BWB, is a not-for-profit financial advisory and capital raising firm. Basically, we're a group of ex-investment bankers looking to put our skills to better use within the environmental and social impact space. So some of you may know us through our role in the Net Zero Cities project, where we're one of the key finance partners and supporting just over 100 cities in their journey to net zero. But otherwise, it's very, very nice to meet you today, and I'm very excited to contribute towards this discussion. We'll flip to the next slide. Brilliant, yeah. Feel free to just click through so everything appears on this slide if that's easier. Brilliant, thanks. So yeah, what I'll speak to you for about 10 minutes or so are the key barriers and bottlenecks for the financial sector in investing in TENs or PEN-like projects. I think I'll start with the first one, which is a lack of track record. And really we can think of this as the umbrella barrier that encompasses a lot of what else I'll talk about today. Thinking about decarbonising using place rather than individual assets is something that's very innovative, and PENs are one of the first of these types of projects that's being piloted across Europe or even globally. So naturally, as this track record is still being developed and there's a number of issues are still being worked through, that is going to be a big barrier to really getting the financial sector participating in a meaningful way. So essentially risk and or perceived risk for these sorts of projects remains high. And that is something that ultimately, until we develop a pipeline of pilot projects, that is something that's still going to be a key barrier and a key bottleneck. And we can think of this as we frame all of the other barriers that I'll touch on today. The next one is a scale or lack of scale. Now, actually, PEN-like projects simultaneously tackle this issue, but also still face it as a challenge. So given PENs are very neighbourhood-focused projects, this in itself is aggregating a number of buildings, a number of different assets in one. So one project already has a significant amount of scale compared to projects that perhaps look at individual buildings or individual assets. So I think PENs are really interesting because they try to address this issue head on, but still thinking about the lack of track record until we get scale in terms of the pipeline, scale in terms of the pilot project,
Christine, I think we're having Christine, I think we're having some technical issues. I think the connection is not so good. So maybe you can try to turn off the camera. Let's see if this helps with the sound, because we're having difficulties to hear you.
I'm really sorry. I'm at an offsite actually, and so I'm not sure the internet connection is as good as I would like it to be, even though I'm in the business centre. But okay, is that a little better if I turn off the camera?
Yes, thank you.
Yes. So maybe just to quickly recap. So on the scale issue, PENs do try to tackle this simultaneously by aggregating many buildings, many assets in one. So naturally, these projects do tend to have more scale than projects that think about individual buildings or individual assets. But at the same time, given that we're at the early stage of piloting this model, the scale and certainly the scale of the pipeline is still relatively limited and not enough at this point to bring the financial sector in meaningfully. So I'll move on as well to the fact that this is a multi-asset approach. Investment models that are more established do tend to be more sector or asset specific. So we hear a lot about solar PV, for example. That's a very well-established investment business model with a relatively well-known IRR, for example. PENs approach decarbonisation in an innovative way, in that the key unifier is place rather than assets. And that does lead to a lot of positives that you'll probably all know from PENs, such as the opportunity for revenue stacking, as well as the broader social and environmental benefits that this kind of model does lead to. But on the, I guess, I wouldn't say negative, but on the, at the moment, what's a key challenge is that financial investors don't fully yet understand these sorts of models. And again, we can tie this into the track record point from the start. But these sorts of models aren't really fully baked into investment processes, financial models. There's also the problem of cherry picking. So actually when investors do look at more of a multi-asset project, sometimes they wonder, can I actually just invest in the solar PV element, which I know has a more established return? Can I leave the building retrofit element, which, as we all know, is one of the more challenging sectors? So really, it's their educational process that does need to happen, as well as the piloting process to build the track record. This very much leads into the next circle you can see, which is low returns or perceived low returns of core sectors. So PEN-like projects do tend to coalesce around buildings. And again, as we all know, buildings do tend to be one of the trickier sectors to decarbonise for a number of reasons, not least because of the fragmented ownership structure, especially if you're thinking about residential as well. So the previous speaker, Adrian, has already touched on elements of this, that actually, when we decarbonise buildings, often the cost benefit or the financial benefit, that tends to be secondary to the kind of social benefit, or if you're an individual homeowner, that's secondary to your comfort. So actually building financial models around this sector is something that still needs a lot of work. And when we do think about the potential revenue streams from buildings, they tend to come in the form of cost savings, which again, as Adrian mentioned, there's quite a lot of mistrust around, and a lot of factors might influence what the potential cost savings are. And at the same time, cost savings are seen less favorably or with a higher risk than a newly generated revenue stream. So I think a big barrier for the financial sector meaningfully investing in PENs is the fact that it is very much centered around the building sector, which, as we know, comes with many challenges. Now, this actually leads on to the next circle, which is community engagement. And again, this is because buildings are so central to these sorts of projects. And one of the reasons buildings are so tough to decarbonise is that there's a fragmented ownership structure. PENs will almost certainly include residential or some level of residential, and immediately you have all the social challenges of trying to engage with multiple different owners, multiple different tenure types. And sometimes you talk to financial institutions who say, even if you can get the financial model to work, what I'm really worried about is, are people actually going to do this? Can we actually engage the community? Can we actually engage residents? And often the social barriers can't even trump the kind of financial barriers for potential investors. So this again leads on to the next circle, which is the fact that these are multi-stakeholder projects because they have a multi-asset approach. And again, the community are a huge stakeholder, but also because you're thinking about a place much more systematically, thinking about district heating, shared infrastructure, that immediately increases the number of stakeholders that will need to be engaged for these kinds of projects. And again, that increases the risk and or perceived risk for potential investors as well. And just finally, a couple of points on policy. Now, I'll be the first to admit I'm not a policy expert, but you can see that certainly in some geographies, and this will naturally vary between different countries, the policy or regulatory landscape could be updated to be more favourable, I suppose, to the financial sector. So, for example, and again, the previous speaker, I think, touched on these financial mechanisms to perhaps channel to capture energy savings or channel revenue mechanisms into buildings and other core sectors are sort of, the regulatory environment is more favourable in some countries than others. So we do see some pilots with looking at mechanisms such as on-bill financing, on-tax financing. There are other countries that can't necessarily do this because of the outdated regulation, and it could limit the amount of innovation that we can see around financial mechanisms. So that in itself is a key barrier as well. And just finally, flipping the policy point on its head, I think broadly so far what I've talked about is why investors perceive PEN-like projects as being challenging to invest. But actually, we can turn this on its head as well. So what is driving investors to want to invest in ESG-related projects? There's growing stakeholder pressure to do so, of course, but broadly, this isn't really mandated in policy. The top-down policy incentives are coming in more slowly. Perhaps we could have a policy environment where there was more of a stick to try and invest in these sorts of projects. I think it's broadly accepted, even if it isn't always measured, that PEN-like projects do have greater social impact. So projects that are centered around place and take quite a holistic approach do come with better social, better environmental impact. So yeah, in a sense, perhaps there could be greater policy incentives for the financial sector to be deploying capital into these sorts of impactful projects as well. I will stop there and hand back to Victoria, and I hope you can see me, and apologies for the dodgy connection.
Yes, Christine, thank you so much. The connection was much better. Now we could hear you perfectly. And since you cannot stay with us for the panel discussion, maybe Peter from Vito can have some questions for you. We have like maybe some reflections. Peter?
Yeah, thank you, Christine, for your presentation. I'm really happy to see a lot of your obstacles, let's say, come back in what we see on the ground in our open lab. If I understand well, a lot of it is actually based around data and reliability to be able to reduce your perceived risk. So I really hope that from our point of view, from our open lab experience and basically the pilots that we have, we can break the ice, let's say, and we can broaden the experience and work on getting this track record on the rails, let's say. I agree with your analysis as well of the multi-asset approach, where we see that there is some cherry picking. There are some aspects of the renovations and specifically the technical installations where the return on investment is quite different from when you consider the installation and the PV installations, for instance. Do you see a movement there on the financial side to want to include more of these assets rather than to focus on the ones that are actually financially more interesting?
I think, as with everything, there is a kind of first mover cohort, so a small group, and I do think it is small at this point. There is a small group of much more engaged financial institutions who are willing to engage at this early stage where they don't feel the projects are ready, but they're kind of willing to engage, willing to give feedback, willing to try and grow this market or grow place as an asset class. You know, I think we're in the early days. I think that is a small subset. And I think a really important part of, well, certainly the work we're trying to do is also engage the financial sector. So yes, do pilots, yes, build the track record, but try and bring more of the financial sector in at an early stage to partly educate, but partly also allow them to feed back so we can develop the pilots in a way that kind of meets in the middle, to meet the requirements of the project developers, but also the requirements of the market at the same time. So yeah, I think the short answer is there's a small group that are, but I think there is still a long way to go.
And how difficult do you think it is to convince the shareholders, let's say, of the financial institutions to lower their expectations on the return on investment if we're going to have broader investments in also the assets that have a lower return on investment?
Yeah. So I think critically, what we are not asking financial institutions to do is necessarily lower their expectations for their returns. I think that is, you know, something that in an ideal world might happen, but probably wouldn't. What we would need to do is put in place structures, for example, blended finance structures that pairs different sorts of capital with some commercial capital to still allow the commercially focused investors to achieve that rate of return that's in their mandate and isn't something that is going to change. So, you know, for example, I guess if you think about a classic blended finance model, a more standard one, if you will, you'd be thinking about public funding and using that to leverage more private finance to allow the private investor to still achieve their rate of return. What we need to do is be more innovative in that public finance section and see if we can bring alternative forms of private finance that perhaps don't seek a return or don't seek a financial return that can act as that catalytic capital. So just as an example, I think there's a lot of emerging work looking at the positive social outcomes that come out of PENs or PEN-like projects, and some emerging work around this and whether this data around impact can be used to bring in perhaps finance from corporates. So perhaps corporates are interested in financing renovation projects using their ESG budgets, and if we can prove the social impact, for example, if lots of their employees live in one place, then you can build a business case to get corporates or similar financial institutions to invest, but for an impact return rather than a financial return. So if we can get more innovative capital playing this catalytic role, then that still leaves space for commercially driven financial investors to come in and still see the rate of return that they are mandated to expect. So it's thinking about blended finance structures, but in a more innovative way. And I think critically, what we're not trying to do is asking financial investors to lower their rate of return or change their mandate significantly.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Christine. Thank you, Peter.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us. And Now we have to move on. I'm sorry to interrupt this interesting discussion, but we can pick it up, Peter, in the panel discussion. And now Peter, you can dive in a bit more into the Henk Open Living Lab. So Peter is a senior researcher and project manager at Vito, and he's coordinating the Henk Open Living Lab. That is one of our free demos in Open Lab. So Peter, the floor is yours. Just please be mindful of the 10 minutes, because we would like to have space for the final discussion.
Yeah. Thanks, Victoria. You can go directly to the next slide then. So effectively, we are looking at an urban revitalization. We're working to transitioning vulnerable neighborhoods in 3 different cities in Europe towards a positive energy neighborhood. These are 3 cases in existing urban context where we really want to have an innovative process in a realistic setting. The ideal outcome, obviously, is a replicable, commercially viable solution as to increase our impact on the bigger environment. You can already go to the next slide to set the stage a bit about Genk, our specific case, and the city we're in. It is a vulnerable city. In comparison to the rest of Flanders, the prosperity is a bit lower, as you can see on the schedule on the right. There's more people with overdue mortgage loans. The energy poverty is more important than the rest of Flanders. And if you click, you will see the neighborhood that we're focusing on the maps in the bottom. Those are the green ones in the center. They have an average income compared to the rest of Genk, but actually the red category, let's say on the left image, is the average income in Flanders. So Genk already is on the lower edge in Flanders, and our neighborhood is in even lower average income there. And there's a really high level of renters. So the ownership is quite low in these neighborhoods. So we're really in a vulnerable area. Next slide, please. Then our pen in Waterschei. We are obviously focusing on one positive energy neighborhood, but there's a lot of numbers going around, and there's a lot of partners throwing their insights into the scales. So we have 2 different areas. There's a social housing estate where we have 25 families we're working for, and privately owned homes in the Garden City where we're looking for 8 families to join our living lab. Next slide, please. And both of those areas get their specific solution. So they will get, on the social housing estate, they will get a new envelope. In this case, it's paid for by the social housing company. So they have their set up financing schemes, which they manage to maintain. In our case, actually, luckily, we're able to get some more innovative funding from their side, because we're using prefab components. So they are prefabricated in a factory and installed on site, which for the moment still is more expensive than installations on site itself. And we're making these buildings basically near zero energy. So they get the same standard as new buildings. In these homes, we will have the technologies financed by Vito, so by the Open Lab project, and they will get a prefabricated energy box, which means that they will get, like you see on the image, an additional room installed next to their house with all the carbon neutral technologies that we will provide. In the Garden City, on the other hand, we will have a building renovation which is financed by the private owner. So again, this is the neighborhood with very low financial capacities. So this is really depending on their financial capacity and the state of the building today. Additional obstacle there is this is a heritage neighborhood, so everything has to be done with respect to the heritage value of these homes. Basically, we lower the standards here a bit in the sense that we want to make these buildings mainly heat pump ready, so we're not going to go for a near zero energy building. And in this situation, we will also get the technologies funded by Vito or the Open Lab project, but they will be integrated inside of the existing volume. Next slide, please. So for this, Victoria already showed you this image. There's an array of solution packages, and if you click slowly, you can see them all appear. We have individual and collective systems. We will look at different setups for the storage. We will have different heat pump technologies. We will have different emission systems. We will have separate renewable energies, both PV, BIPV, and we will also get some neighborhood infrastructure. So the ones that are in the center, they will also have storage, renewable energy, and they also have a link to EV charging. These all will be smart controlled in order to have the optimal balance. And obviously their energy sharing will be a big aspect here. We will have a local energy community set up to make sure that we can share and balance all these energy flows. Then some of the obstacles that we have encountered. So the private investment capacity, like you saw on the initial slide, is small to non-existent in these areas. The a la carte selection of items from the solution packages that reduces the impact is the same thing as Christina said. The cherry picking is an issue here because we see that the return on investment of the deep renovation is a lot lower than those of the technical installations. And then there again, the PV is a lot more interesting than the heat pumps. In Belgium specifically, the spark, so the ratio of gas to electricity prices, hampers the return on investment of the heat pumps. So gas is so cheap that it makes the installation of heat pumps a lot less interesting, sadly. And then the free of charge energy sharing today is also an hamper on the return on investment of surplus PV production. So basically today, everything you have as a surplus production, you can share with your neighbors, but you cannot get any funding back from it. So you won't have really a business case of putting a PV installation that is too big bigger than your own consumption. And as well, there's a gap in knowledge, understanding, and skills. Like Christina said, there's a need for meaningful and reliable estimates of the energy savings in order to make a proper business case. And as well, we see that the advice that the installers give is in general more conservative. So they try to stick to things that they know rather than to be a bit more optimistic. And then you see the animation already went. There was the person jumping over the obstacle. There's a few solutions that we saw. Next slide, please. So we can optimize the solution package. You all probably know the Trias Energetica, where we first reduce the energy demand. Then we use renewable energy. And the third item was to use fossil fuels efficiently. Obviously, this is something that we want to remove. And we're rather going to go for optimized use of the energy. And that can be by either using checking the investments, finding optimizations in balancing energy efficiency and renewable energy, taking into account pre-bound and rebound effects, stuff like this. Yep. So there, like I said, in Waterschei, we're going to go for the heat pump ready homes, which means that the investment is a lot lower. And we can hopefully get these houses free from the fossil fuels and heated in a more sustainable way. Then we saw also the collective technical installations. Currently, we're doing it via our investment from Vito and the Open Lab. In the future, this could be an ESCO, because there we have 4 dwellings that are connected to a single energy box, which actually reduce the investment per household by 50%. This is being tested in the New Texas area, like I said. But currently, we see that legal barriers prevent the rollout in different districts, whereas this could actually mean that we really reduce the investment that's needed. Yeah. And also the scale, if we can increase the volume of the prefabricated solutions, we can also reduce the cost there. The stuff that we have heard from the producer of the prefabricated solution is that if they would have a yearly order volume of more than 40,000 square meters, that would allow them to have production lines that are optimized for with purchasing processes and logistics, so they could actually start reducing their costs. For the moment, they are still more expensive than traditional building. This would also mean that we have to look again at our tender processes, because for the moment they favor smaller assignments rather than large framework agreements. There's also a balance to be found between making the market play and getting the best price for your renovation. But the bigger the frameworks can be, the more sense it makes for those players to invest in their factories. And then there's a really nice word in Dutch, ontzorging, which literally means taking away the concerns. And this is actually the case for the entire renovation ecosystem. This is, for instance, done in Belgium by digitalizing the renovation wave. We are making sure that we can have data access to allow for data-driven decision-making, which allows us to have reliable estimates on energy saving, taking into account the pre-bound and the rebound effects. And for this case, we actually made the neighborhood renovation tool in Flanders. This is being developed right now. It should be live at the end of this month. And it is a digital twin that allows for impact assessment of renovation strategies on a neighborhood scale. So really to take into account the CO2 reduction, the prices for the renovations, starting from an actual energy use, not the energy use from the EPC labels, and also having a better assessment, let's say, of the actual energy use after renovation to have a correct idea of what you can actually save on a neighborhood scale. And in this, I think I finished within my time.
Thank you. Brilliant, Peter. Thank you so much. We will, there are some questions in the chat, but I think we will pick them up later in the panel discussion. And now we move to the final presentation of today's workshop. And we have with us Borja Gomuzio from Engineer Finance, and he's involved in the OPEN one-stop shop, which is one-stop shop set up in Basque Country, and he will talk about this mix of public grants, loans, and guarantees that make renovation accessible to all. Borja, the floor is yours.
Yes, just before, thank you very much, everyone. Thank you, Victoria, for preparing this meeting. I haven't got time before the meeting to see how my microphone works. So if there is any problem, just let me know, please.
We can hear you well.
As Victoria mentioned, OPEN is a urban renovation project here based in the Basque Country that promotes urban renovation in vulnerable neighborhoods. A little bit about what is the Basque Country. Basque Country is a region in the north of Spain that has some one of the oldest building stock in Spain, and although we have one of the high incomes here in Spain, through an analysis made in 2020 about all the indicators shows that there is a lot of vulnerable districts in the Basque Country that need some support from the public administration. So what we're doing is to setting a net of one-stop shops based on the three potentials, the service that we provide from a technical point of view, a social point of view, and a financial point of view. That is the one that is focused on this meeting. Just to mention that we started from 2000, I think it was 2018 with 2 municipalities, and now we are something between 25 and 26 already open. So from the financial point of view, what we need to understand exactly is what is the problem that we face right now. To showing up the problem, I bring you here this graph that represents what is the net income of the population in the Basque Country, knowing that this is not exactly the only metric that banks look up. The net income is also something very important, of course, but it's not the only one, but it shows up basically which is the problem right now. If you come forward, what we see now is that we need to make a financial service that is affordable for families and fair for everyone. So everyone can really find a financial solution to implement this house. What we saw making analysis back in 2018 is that there is a lot of commercial bank solutions that are now taken in place and can solve basically the 60% of the issues of the society here in the Basque Country, but they are not focused on vulnerable neighborhoods. And as just Christine mentioned, there is some issues and barriers that needs to be solved in order to make everyone can join these loans without any problem. There is another gap in that society that has medium incomes and some from some like of a lot of situations, such as like the age, or probably because they got a lot of loans, or because the mortgage is really big, or whatever, they don't have access to this kind of some banking solution. So in this place, what we set over here is a financial mechanism that is a joint between public and private funds that provide services to all this gap. Is this red section in the left side of the screen. What we do over here is to create a guarantee fund with funds provided, as I mentioned, from public and private actors. That is complements what is our financial services, and with that, what we did is to find basically, well, we developed something between the 85% of the 85% of the buildings inside the neighborhoods that we started to work with. They already make the urban renovation. And if we go further with the solution, now whether we know what is the problem here in the Basque Country, we can talk about the solution and how we do it. If we can go to the next slide, please. To the next slide. What we need and what we did over here is to develop a complex solution that includes everyone, covering the 50%, almost the 50% of the installation with grants, with special services for each type of citizens that we have in this situation. People that has low incomes and really complicated situations, what we offer them is loans provided by the public sector with a 30 years maturity, that is within special conditions, and so everyone can be included. Over there, what we see is that we've got the blue square on the screen. This is loans provided also with this mechanism of collaboration between public and private institutions that can goes from up to 15 years loans with a low interest rate, and can show us or can provide solutions that is really matches with the needs of the citizens. We already signed loans for 40 euros per month, or because of the maturity of the loan and the low the interest rate, and that really helps everyone to really find a solution for the financial needs. For the rest of the individuals that are not included in this situation, I mean, let's connect a little bit further than before. What we saw is that the people or the citizens that don't have any financial solutions, they really need something. Well, for the citizens that have financial solutions, meaning that there are some banks interested in offer some finance over here. What we do on the top is saying, okay, over all your offers you've got, I show you one more, our own product, and the citizen decide what he wants to do. In either way, what we do is to offer them support on choosing which is the best solution. We don't care if they choose our solution or they go for the banks. What we're looking over here is to guarantee them the best services that we can provide. And in this sense, a lot of citizens really goes through the bank solutions because they trust them, or because it's a better offer, or because it's any reasons that they've got. That's the reason you can see over here that the split between green and blues in between 12 and 18,000 euros. If we move forward to the left, to the right get back to the one. Thank you. If we move to the right side of the graph, we will see that when you go to net incomes, that there's something between 20,000 euros. There are a lot of more banking solutions, financial solutions, and the citizens have even more types of solutions that they can provide. So they decided for another kind and they decided to go for the banks or whatever they wanted, as we did previously. Our financial mechanism is focused really for vulnerable peoples that has low incomes. We don't have many citizens that with high incomes really goes through our solutions, because the banks offers better solutions for them. So really something between 30K, something like that. We don't have any more citizens because they don't need it. This is a solution that is really looks forward to solve all the issues. And as I mentioned, in Benguela, we already in the 4 neighborhoods that we are already working in, we already developed something like the 80%, 85% of all the housing, all the buildings inside the neighborhoods. We go for the next one. Knowing that I can be speaking here for 3 days and I only got 15 minutes, I would like to go a little bit with the problems and solutions and what impacts really makes some of the critical issues that we offer here in the Basque Country. The first thing that we say, the first problem is that the high loans installation really doesn't fix with a social economical reality of our neighborhoods. We are working in vulnerable neighborhoods, and 100 euros per month loan is not affordable for the citizens. So what we're looking forward here is to make loans that really fixes where the conditions. And for that, what we do is to, as Adrian said, the maturity of the loan is one of the most important issues to have over here. Usually banks offers in this kind of neighborhoods 5 years loan. We upgrade that to a 15-year loan, so 15 years loan, so really makes reduce really much the monthly payment of these ones, down to 40 euros per month. It's not one, but a lot of loans that we sign with this type of monthly incomes for the full renovation of their buildings. This really encourage the city and the neighborhoods to go further forward with the urban renovation, because they feel empower themselves, because they really feel that they will be able to pay for this, and they really stop thinking about the issues of how we're going to pay all this and start thinking of when I'm going to start and what are they going to do, and they feel much more comfortable with taking decisions to move on this. There is a large part of the population that they don't have access to finance, not only because of the net income, because they are all age, they go over the top of the age of the banks. Normally, banks don't lend money to people that once the loan is already gone, are the age are over 70 or 75 years old. And our neighborhoods already exceed that age. So what we're looking forward here is to find solutions, not only with our financial mechanism, but also with the banks, to see how we can go through this barrier. It's a huge barrier indeed. Our mechanism, financial mechanism, we upgrade that limit to 85 years. It's not good enough, but it's a first step. And for that, there is a lot of persons that we also already provided. But also, we try to encourage the citizens to see if there is any son or daughter or anyone that can really co-sign the loan, or look at for other solutions to provide them the financial alternative, not only our solution. This in our neighborhood, almost 75 of the citizens they really have this age issue, this kind of problems. So this is one of the things that, for example, Christine mentioned on the previous panel. something like supporting to solve these barriers with the financial, like building a robust track record in the past country. She mentioned the lack of scalability, knowing that the OpenGela program is placed on 25 neighborhoods, and our goal is to go further to all the Basque country. This lack of scaling up is, I think, a little bit supported and solved, and the financial institutions feel really comfortable talking with us because they feel that they're scaling up to the full Basque country. We encourage or promote as best as we can the community loans, because we think that for these communities is the best solution for everyone. I know that some communities are really complicated due to the social situation, but we really look forward always to do this kind of solutions. Well, helping the compliance department is also something that we already try to do with the financial institutions. The financial institutions, they don't know all the current loans or the current situation about what we are really doing. So what we do is to go to each bank, not the citizens, but the OpenGela service, and explain to the bank with full details, with all the documents, with everything. So by the time the citizen go to the bank, they already know everything about the project, all about the loans, all about the grants, everything. So it makes things really more simple for establish a good relationship between the bank and the citizen that is looking forward to finance. And last but not least, we keep all the impacts that we produce in our neighborhoods. What we're looking forward to is to make sure that the financial sector knows the impact and the revenues and everything that involves the financial, the urban renovation. As Christian mentioned on the first introduction, one of the most the biggest topics that we have to go through is to explain which are the impacts of house renovation on this side. And this is one thing that we really got on our NDA, and we really get all this information and share it with all the banks to let them know which is the impact. We need to maximize the impact of urban renovation. Yes, it is obvious. Can we go further to the next one, please? So just a couple of lessons learned. 5 key messages. By 2050, we need to discover and analyze all our neighborhoods, leaving no one behind. That means that we need to focus for integral urban renovation, and the most complicated one will be the vulnerable sectors on this side. We need projects to be with a territorial perspective and be sure that it's completely not the same solution for everyone, but it's completely add to the solution inside each territory. The next one, can we go further? Yeah, well, the regional government is key for promoting everything over here. What we saw over here is that public authorities have the key to promote it. They need to really understand that the public efforts as grants or providing what is it? Sorry for this. The risking mechanism. Yeah.
Just be aware of the time.
No, just I try to be. You know, I got the issue that I always talk about this, and I have something around an hour, and I try to reduce everything in 10 minutes. It's really hard for me, you know, because I can be talking about this.
No, take your time. Hours. You can still have like a minute to recommend.
It's only going to be 2 minutes more. So the public authorities really have the key. They need to promote internally the urban renovation and also in vulnerable sectors. The grants are really important over here, of course, because they cover almost 50% but also it's not enough. They need to support with the risk mechanism, to support the financial institutions, to provide financing in these sectors, and also to provide and to make sure that it's for everyone. The role of the one-stop shops is key over here, to make trust on the citizens, to promote this. They need to understand that this is not because of the as it's been mentioned by Christine and Adrian previously, it's not only because of the economical solution, but it's also because it really has benefits on the way of living, in the way of living. This is something really, really important, and without a one-stop shop inside each district, it's really complicated to promote in vulnerable sectors. And last but not least, the financial markets. We need to change the scope in the financial markets. We need the public authorities to have a role key in these markets and promote affordable financing and the risk mechanism, as Adrian or Christine just mentioned before. There are a lot of barriers that need to be solved, and the public authorities here will play a special role, as we did over here. Just to mention that, yeah, we already deployed we solved the solution, the financial needs for in our neighborhoods, and the 80–90% of the buildings has already been renovated in vulnerable neighborhoods, which is really makes things much more complicated than on middle-class neighborhoods.
Thank you, Borja. It's very nice to hear that with strong leadership from the local government, it is possible to get on board the vulnerable households. And it's very nice to hear how the government is also guiding this collaboration between the banks and private households. Okay, I also appreciate your effort to summarize so much information in such a short time. But now we can dive a bit deeper. Also, we can keep discussing about OpenGela in our panel discussion. And I will now give the floor to Julie Emmerich from World Green Building Council. So we still have with us Adrien Bullier, we have Peter Bosmans and Borja, but we also have Yannick Alto from Green Digital Finance Alliance. So yes, Julie, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Victoria. Yes, good morning to everyone. I'm, as Victoria was saying, Julie Emmerich I'm the Sustainable Finance Lead at the World Green Building Council. So I've been listening with, big ears to everything that's been said. It's super interesting. And I'm picking up also some discussion or some questions from the chat. But let me look at my notes. Maybe I will start with, addressing some questions to the panelists, and maybe I start with Adrien, since it's been a while that we haven't heard from you, as you were going first. I was noting, on the, I guess you were going through a lot of possible solutions, and some of them we heard later from other panelists on how they've been maybe working with some of them. And one recurring topic that came to mind when listening to the presentations is the role, or how to say, the different approaches to an investment, whether it's the reduction of costs or the enhancement of value. And I think, I don't know, maybe if you could reflect on this point, that it seems to me that a lot of the barriers is that just reducing the costs is not enough as an incentive to really go for an investment, including, through debt financing. But I wonder what your perspective is on enhancing the value of a property through, for example, deep renovation, and not just adding a solar panel on the rooftop. Is the question clear?
Well, I don't think it's a matter of perspective. I think it's a matter of fact. As a matter of fact, today there is clear evidence that property value increases with the energy performance of a home. So I don't think it's a question of how you look at it. The question of how you look at it is how you convince people to invest. And for this so property value is clearly one of the potential drivers. But there are many things when you look at, taking a decision to invest your homes. I mean, if we could do a show of hands in the room, I'd be interested to know how many people in the room have done a deep renovation on their home, and how many would do it again tomorrow. Because let's face it, it's not just about finance. It's about many things, many things. It's very complicated. And you improve your comfort. Yes, you improve your property value, but are you ready to go all the way? It's so I think we're looking at a multi-factor environment where finance is one of the aspects, but comfort and property value. And it's not that there's one perspective which is more important than others. It depends actually a lot, because we're talking about buildings, residential buildings in the EU that doesn't exist. There's one situation in the Basque Country in vulnerable districts. That's one type of situation. But there are many places where, populations are mixed. And so it's not that you have 100% vulnerable households in a district. It could be different. And then in Henk, we're talking about part of it being social housing, part of it being privately owned. So we need to have a comprehensive approach and adapt it to the areas that we're looking at. I don't know if that answers, but
Great. No, it's interesting to hear. I was just thinking that it could be a better case for banks, but then again, I don't know how that relates to them in enhancing the property, since they don't,
for banks,
that value back to them.
It's no the value aspect for banks is now a clear one. Banks are, we've been funding, for example, the energy efficient mortgage initiative for several years. For all banks, whether they are actually, complying with that initiative or doing it on their own, it's very clear. It's clear for the European Central Bank. It's clear for the European Banking Authority. So that's no longer a question. The question is, what's next? What do we do, and how do we grow the market? And I think, one of the questions which I'd like to hear about is, there's a lot of talk on district renovation approaches, but from a banking perspective, because we're talking about banks here, what does it mean? How do you aggregate? Aggregating people who live together in the same building is not an easy thing. Aggregating people who live in the same neighborhood, which has no legal entity, that's what I'd like to hear about.
Yes, very interesting. Thank you, Adrien. And I will then hand over to Peter, since you have a hand raised. Maybe you can come with some on the ground realities or stories to share.
Yeah, thanks. Because effectively, like Adrien says, the value that you create by renovating, this is already clear. What is a challenge still, I think, is the co-benefits that you can generate, the increased health of the inhabitants, the increased comfort. Can you put a number to this? And can we actually activate these values to reduce the risk when investing? Because this is still a gap, and the value of a home increasing in value, let's say after renovation, it's all good and well, but the homeowners today don't have the ability to invest. So there's still a bit of a mismatch there. And I think Christine also mentioned there the need for financial models to capture this complex totality, let's say, that would help them to reduce their perceived risk.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. And Yannicka, let's go to you, since you have a hand raised as well.
Thank you.
On the same topic.
Yes, I think so. Good morning, everyone. So I'm from an organization called the Green Digital Finance Alliance. So we're an NGO who works a lot on developing innovative financing mechanisms and solutions, in this case for the built environment. And I just wanted to reflect a little bit on some of the really interesting insights and the questions that were posed now around aggregating demand on a neighborhood scale. We talk a lot about community action, energy communities. And I feel like at least we see a lot in our work that those of us who work in this space, I think we have a certain understanding and a worldview of how popular some of these solutions are. We kind of are maybe a little bit in our bubble there. But then when we talk a little bit beyond scaling beyond these pilot projects, for instance, it seems like often there is no real community in the physical world in the same way as we understand it. So, for instance, we're talking about trying to activate an entire neighborhood somewhere else to take on a renovation project like that. What is the forum where all of these neighbors and local businesses and sort of public entities, where do they converge? Where do they actually have conversations to even start initiating interest in something like this? Because on paper, you might call something a community or district, but actually the different entities, I don't know my neighbors where I'm sitting, so it's really hard to actually go to the real world. So I think they're a little bit of sort of reality check. I think I have to sometimes remind myself, like, that's actually the reality of the people. And if we don't speak to that reality, then it's going to be a really, really tough job ahead. So therefore, some of these living labs and sort of physical presence, I think we've heard some great examples of having one-stop shops that are local, physical places that neighbors see and can visit. I think that's really, really valuable to bring those solutions to the people.
Maybe before I hand back to Adrien to readdress the question, sorry, to you, Borja, because you seem to have a very successful case in a way, or a case study, and you were talking about scaling, which is super interesting, I think, and you were talking about scaling to the Basque Country, but maybe for the benefit of the audience, what's your take on scaling up to maybe to the whole of Spain or the whole of Europe? Just some thoughts on that. And then secondly, I thought it was very interesting how you mentioned trust. And I think that's the issue also with the neighborhood having no legal entity. I was wondering if you could reflect on, do people trust their neighbors, and that's why they may be more willing to go for neighborhood scale, financing schemes, for example?
Okay, thank you very much for your questions. Let me answer the first one first and then go to the second one. Back in 2018, we've got an idea that, as Adrien mentioned, we need to develop our own service here in the Basque Country for neighborhoods. For that, what we need to know is to understand which are the needs and which are the solutions that has to be taking place in order to develop a solution a service that really encourages people and citizens to move for the urban renovation. We started back in 2018 being supported by the European Commission under H 2020 program. Now we are looking up to make a new project that also brings communities, big communities, to aggregate information. As Janica just mentioned, it's really important to the aggregation on the market. And in parallel, we're looking to escalate everything to 25-hour service in 25 neighborhoods. The one-stop shops in these 25 neighborhoods has been open the last 2023, so it's 1 year from now that it's been working, and we don't have enough track record to be comfortable to the upscale to the rest of the Basque Country and in a second place into to Spain. If you ask ourselves, of course, we are completely aligned with those goals. We were looking forward to scale up to the full Spain service, but we need to be sure that what we are going to develop will be with the same level of quality and be able to provide the same kind of solutions to the problems that the neighborhoods are going to have. So we need to go step by step in this side and go a little bit, don't run too much, because we can find ourselves that we're not providing the solution that is needed over here. The second question here is trust. Trust for us is the key. We need we need to understand that when we arrive to the neighborhood, what are the needs of the neighborhood is completely different, and doesn't include to renovate the building. Is not included even in the top 10 of questions that is need to be done on the next 5 years. We need to build the conscience, we need to educate it, we need to make them believe that even though they will not receive or will get any economical result of this, just because, as Adrian mentioned, these neighborhoods, they don't turn on the heaters because they cost money, and what they do is to put up 3 or 4 pillows or whatever they've got on the over there. They will win in comfort. They will win in life expectation. They will win in healthy solutions. All these goals that the urban renovation really achieve, they need to trust them. If we don't sell the trust, it's impossible for ourselves to move the citizens in the neighborhoods to really embrace what is the urban renovation. If they bring us, I don't know, 50% of a grant for photovoltaic panels, for example, will be really complicated to go ahead without trust in what is the renewable energy. The one-stop shop for us, it means to build trust in the neighborhood, providing all the services, and to be sure that everyone that goes inside the one-stop shop comes with a problem, and the service that we provide finds a solution for that problem, for that citizen. That's our goal, and that's the trust that we build in our neighborhoods. It's really important, the social part. We always talk about the technical part. We always say we are here talking about the financial solutions, but the social impacts of our neighborhoods is really, really important to be solved over here, because it's key. For us, it's key.
Great, thank you so much for sharing and reflecting. I'll pass over to Adrien, who wants to jump back in, and we'll add also a question to you on something that was posted in the Q&A section on the involvement of ESCOs, and that they themselves, I mean, they are a solution because they take off the upfront investments of the shoulder of the households, for example, but they themselves also, face the same challenges, financing challenges. So if you could also reflect on that one, the involvement of ESCOs.
Well, yeah, I mean, maybe just to react to what Borja was saying, I think district renovation programs have been around for probably more than 50 years, or 40 years at least, long before there was talk about energy renovation. And so what we're talking about, what I think OPEN is doing very successfully in the Basque Country, is fully integrating energy renovation as part of a broader approach to district renovation. And that makes a lot of sense. On the other hand, we have a number of places, number of homes, which are not necessarily part of a district renovation program, and will still need to have energy renovation there. And so maybe the approach there is not the same. And so I think we need to have different approaches, and it's not that one is better than the others. But coming back to the issue of private finance, private finance, I think, is pretty agnostic. It goes where they find the risk and return profiles that their investors are agreeing with. What we need is to create the environment for that. And that environment will be definitely defined by local conditions, by the profiles of the homeowners, by the level of grants, and so on. But it's also defined by the question of scale. And on the question of scale, we need to make a difference between scale and aggregation. To talk about ESCOs, I'll come back to that later, but we have been funding a lot of projects for over 10 years, aggregating public authorities to find ESCOs to invest in public buildings and street lighting. It's very complicated, more than you would imagine, and these are public authorities, very good credit rating by essence, large-scale professional buyers, and so on. So aggregating, putting together people to take a loan or to have financial joint responsibility over a financial investment, it's very complicated. If it's to buy a PV plant, well, that's an asset, you can have a legal structure. When it's about investing on your own home, that makes it very complicated. However, scale is not just aggregation. And scale, I think, is building the demand for energy renovation of the homes. in whatever form and whatever approach can be, whether it's like you're doing in Genk, whether it's like you're doing in the Basque Country. But it's only by building sufficient demand that we will find supply of finance from the private sector. I think this is really something we need to invest in, is to develop the private, the demand for building renovation. Talking about ESCOs, yes, there are ESCO experiments in the residential sector. It's limited. We have limited experience with that. There's definitely potential for it to grow. At the moment, this is not necessarily the bullet solution, but well, as we said, there's space for a lot of different solutions. We have been funding also for a few years experience which looked into refinancing of ESCOs on the residential sector, in particular in Latvia, where they created a forfeiting fund, which is basically purchasing the energy performance contracts from ESCOs in order to unfreeze the working capital of the ESCOs so that they're able to do more projects in the future. This is also being replicated at the moment in Poland with funding from public loans for ESCOs. So there is potential for that. Access to finance for ESCOs is definitely an issue, and it's not because you have an ESCO that you solve the finance problem. It stays there.
Thank you for your reflections. I'll come back to Peter from your experience in your project or neighborhood. Two questions. One on how, when you engage the neighborhood and the citizens, how do they understand renovation when you talk about it to them? There was a question in the chat on the definition of a renovation, and then a follow-up question on how do you make the step to really go for deep renovation, what we would call deep renovation, and not just, have maybe just, I mean, you were showing on your slide, right, the different aspects that you like you encompass essentially in your project, and how do you sell that to the citizens and, go away from the let's just paint a bit, then it looks nicer, it looks renovated, and it enhances the value, but it's not a deep retrofit. So maybe in 20 years' time, you need to renovate again.
I think that depends on the different areas that we're working on, because in the social housing estate, we are doing a deep renovation. And funny that you mentioned the paint, because having the home on the inside painted is one of the biggest pluses for the inhabitants in the long run, because they feel like they have a new home on the inside as well. Getting them on board took a lot of coffees and sugar waffles to explain the benefits to them. To actually say, okay, in your life story, it makes sense. It's going to make your life better. It's going to decrease your costs in the end. But it is going to be a cumbersome trajectory to get there. To renovate your home in the fashion that we're doing, it does take a lot of effort and a lot of work. And it's a couple of really heavy weeks for these inhabitants. For the homes in Waterschei, we're jumping as far as the inhabitants can jump financially. And luckily, because we have this framework of the Open Lab project, we can help them jump further than they would do on their own, because part of what they would have to save for their heat pump, for the PV installation, they can actually use now to renovate their homes a bit better than they would have done without the Open Lab project. So there effectively, we're actually surfing on what these people already are doing in the neighborhood. They are buying the homes where their parents used to live, where their aunts used to live. They're amplifying them, they're making them bigger, because those homes were designed 100 years ago. They're not big enough for the current standards. So they're actually adding another kitchen, a living space. And because of these big works that they're already doing, they're revamping the house, the existing house as well. So this is surfing more on this key moment in their life that they want to rethink their house. But maybe, if I may, Adrien, I have a bit of a naughty question. So we saw that the financial sector is not really willing to reduce their return on investment, the expected gains that they would have. And Christina already said, then maybe we can have combined financing solutions where society actually can jump in and say, okay, we're going to bridge the gap. How do we make sure that this is not framed as society basically paying the shareholders of the banks while getting the bigger benefits out of it as a society?
Well, I mean, I don't know how to answer that. I mean, there are, as I said, there are many ways to do this. You could be, I mean, if you're lending public money, then you make sure that, yes, the interest rates don't go to finance the private banks, but that means you're freezing more public money than if you let commercial banks lend. So, you know, there are many options, and you need to choose what is, you know, what is best in a given solution. So in a given context, and I think this leaves a lot of room for, you know, financial feasibility studies, but also very political discussions. Because I agree with you, this is really a policy discussion. This is a political discussion, and this is why this is actually left also to member states and to local authorities and regions to define what is the good solution, because it's a democratic challenge behind it. So as I said, from the European level, you know, the European Commission is making money available for member states to implement those solutions, but the actual design is really to be determined at the local and the national level. So yeah, and again, if you're, I don't think we can expect that private finance will suddenly stop making money. That's, you know, but for example, coming back to my presentation, I think the idea of guarantees is really something to be looked into. If you're putting guarantees for renovation loans, for example, that means you can really significantly reduce the risk profile for investors, and so they will reduce the interest rate that they need, because they can show, well, if my risk is lower, then my return doesn't need to be as high. Mm-hmm. So I think I would really, and it's still, I mean, we don't have so many places where there are guarantee funds being put in place to reduce, you know, for commercial lending. So I would say this is probably something that needs to be developed even more.
Yeah, thanks for sharing your perspective. And I think it's actually interesting when everyone talks about innovative financing schemes, but I feel like it's always the same. Like 20 years ago, we were already talking
there's
about
nothing
guarantees.
Innovative about it. The only reason why we've been talking about innovative financing is because it's not public grants. That's
and it's,
I mean,
not,
there are a few very innovative
available
financing schemes, but at the moment we're talking about very traditional schemes, and that's good. We can go for that.
Indeed, thanks. I will pass over to Borja. You wanted to react, and also if you could add to your input, you know, you've been doing a lot of engagement with the citizens directly in your part of the Basque Country, and I'm wondering, is there a way to maybe train the bankers to do that engagement with their clients, so you don't need essentially projects everywhere? You know, if you could also reflect on that, kind of awareness raising through the bankers.
Yes, of course I can answer that, but just let me please, before answering, telling you, Adrian, that I fully agree with you that guarantees and guarantee funds is the key for this sector. Lending money from public authorities directly to citizens doesn't solve the issue, but it only gives you a little time to really look up for a solution. What we did in the Basque Country, as you already know, is to try to see how to find a solution that really covers our needs. And our needs is that for building renovation here in the Basque Country, we need much more money than the public authorities can pay for that. So we don't have enough money in grants, loans to really go ahead with this. And for that, what we need is to look up for solutions that we are not inventing creating the wheel. We know that the financial institutions already got the tools and they have been here for 30 years. And the best one we hear for us is to look up for guarantees, and the guarantee fund is one of the best solutions that we found. With each euro that you put in a guarantee fund, you can develop or deploy something between 4 or 5 euros in the market. This is really key for our needs over here, because it really multiplies the implication of the public authorities in the Basque Country at least. So if you're looking forward to create some financial institution or tool in your market, I strongly hardly recommend yourself to look after these kind of solutions, because they are, after 1 year of searching for our own solution, this was the best solution that we developed out here. Just keep in mind that we didn't come over here with a solution. We come to the past to our neighborhoods, looking at which is the problem, and knowing the problem, we look up for the solution. And it took us almost 1 year to realize which will be the right condition for the financial services that we provide, the right service that we need to help the citizens. It's not always the same. It's not going to be always the kind of the same solutions. So that was my thing, but I forgot then, Julia, which question did you ask me? So if you don't mind.
Sorry, I was wondering. You know, you did a lot of engagement of the neighborhood,
yes,
right?
Yes, the citizen perspective. Yeah. So okay, fine. The citizen perspective about the financing is not really good. They really trust only 1 or 2 banks, and we really encourage them to try to look up for another solutions in another banks, or try to educate them for more of a financial point of view. You need to understand that our neighborhoods, the citizens that go inside our one-stop shop usually are older people, and you know, they have the same bank for the last 30 years, and that limits ourselves a lot to provide them financial solutions. So the first thing what we need to do is to educate them and then the financial market, and try to move them to more and to explore more solutions. For making things feasible and simple for everyone, knowing the bank and the citizens, what we did is to establish a risk criteria and an appetite, or knowing the appetite of risk for each bank, and for there try to categorize which kind of bank will be willing to accept these citizens as a client. So, for example, if we got a citizen that is from one particular profile, we run out into our own risk table metric to see which kind of banks will be looking forward to get that kind of citizen as a client. And what we do over here is to tell them, don't go to all the banks, but go to this bank or this other bank and talk to him or talk to the other guy. That really makes things much simple. From the bank financial perspective, what it makes more simple is to go up front to the banks to explain the full project in each neighborhood, telling them which kind of grants they will have, which kind of disbursements will they have. As Adrian just mentioned during his presentation, one of the biggest issues is that the disbursement of the grants are being done at the end of the project, and the needs of financials is from the beginning. Our grants here in the Basque Country are disbursed ongoing with the project. So when there's these financial needs from the citizens is already done, they've got the grant. No, they don't need to wait till the end. So this really makes things more comfortable, both for the financial sector and for the citizens. So we need to explain this. We need to explain or know which all the documents they needed. Well, we try to make the life as simple as possible for both the banks and the citizens, because we know that if we leave them in the jungle, they probably won't go any further than the borders. So it's I can talk about this for 3 hours. It's really complicated, you know, because it's been a lot of issues that we solved, and I will be pleased if anyone wants to know more about our situation to share my details, and I could with any problem to help anyone to see. But we talk about 1,000 people in the Basque Country and the financial sector, and really everyone is different. So I don't know if I answered your question, Julia.
Yeah, I think the way I understand is that I guess there's no way around to just skip any type of neighborhood scale project or the involvement of a public institution. You can't just, let the bankers be better, trained in a way to replace the job and engage the clients directly.
There is no magic one. There is no full service that can solve all the problems in each neighborhood, and you develop this solution that is magical and it will go wrong. You need to understand which are the needs of the citizens and which problems are we facing, and with that start working on which kind of solution do you need. There's no magic one. As Adrian mentioned, there's 15 years from now that we're talking about urban renovation, one-stop shop services and everything, and we're still performing which kind of service do we really need. After 15 years of the most brilliant people thinking about this, we still hasn't got already the magic wand, the magic solution. We need to understand that the key over here is that every neighborhood is completely different from the neighborhood side. And we need to understand which are the needs, which solutions do they need to solve. And for that, it's really, really, really more of participating on the meetings, to knowing which are the needs, to knowing more about the details. And from the financial perspective, I don't agree. I think escalating is aggregating, Adrian. I know what you mean, but for me, if you scale up from different neighborhoods, in some point, what you find is that aggregation comes easily. So for me, it's key to see the performance we can do with the 25 neighborhoods to see how we can aggregate financing and which solutions we can do. Probably will be more simple for ESCOs to join, will be more simple for project finance. Well,
my point, if I may just, my point is aggregate. I mean, scaling up is different than aggregating in the sense of having a combined finance with multiple owners taking a loan, for example. I think that I see that as very complicated, much more than an NG community. But that doesn't mean that, we can scale up by, if we have 1,000 or 10,000 or 100,000 loans being taken, then that scale, and that is where it makes it interesting for private finance. If those loans are easy to deliver for the bank, if they're sufficient in size, and if they're easy to resell and to refinance for them. So this is where we need to work on. But I think a lot of the discussions I hear around positive energy neighborhoods and renovation also has this hidden, this implicit idea that you can put all these people together and they will, it will make it attractive for a bank. And until now, I haven't seen how this works, but I'm happy to hear.
Sorry to interrupt this amazing discussion, but Julie and Yannicka, maybe if you can wrap it up in 2 minutes, we have to close at 12. Yes.
Absolutely. Yannicka, if you want to react, and then I'll come with a final input.
Sure. Thank you. I just wanted to briefly say I don't necessarily have an answer for you, Adrian, or some of the other challenges, but I think there's a lot that we can learn from innovation transfer between different industries. So you said that, we've been talking about certain things in the building renovation space for a long time, but, there's a lot of innovation that comes from fintechs generally. So for instance, you might have multiple lending platforms where individuals are able to finance mangrove reforestation projects somewhere in the Caribbean. So then you also, at least we're starting to see that there are individual fintechs who are taking that same idea back to the neighborhood to say, I'm not necessarily financing my own renovation, but a platform or a service allows the neighborhood retail investors, if you wish, to finance scale would be different because we're talking about much more money, but to enable to finance renovation projects, whether that's a school or public building, so bringing together that retail money that otherwise wouldn't be activated for a case like this. So I think there's a lot, some emerging examples there. So just generally thinking about what can we also learn from other industries where innovation is happening, I think is going to be beneficial for this space.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was thinking about the term scalability. I agree. It's not just a quantitative number, but I think it's also, Borja, you were saying it took you 1 year to understand the needs of a neighborhood. So maybe scalability is empowering local authorities with tools to do this process in 2 months instead of 1 year, and come to the conclusions of how to approach and bring the perfect, or like not the perfect, but the appropriate solutions to different profiles. Or what I thought interesting from Peter and Borja's presentations was the income analysis. If there was something that is easily implementable, like a tool that can be used for that, I think that's a type of interesting kind of collaboration that can help scalability. And I wanted, so we run out of time. I wanted to originally listen a bit more to your perspectives on collaboration versus competition, collaboration for scalability. But I think we'll have to, continue the discussion another time. Maybe a final thought, if I may, Victoria. We've been talking repeatedly on the return on investment. And one thing I currently see is that, fossil fuel energy is subsidized quite a bit, and electricity is not. So I think I just wanted to bring up this perspective, on how governments can also help and for vulnerable households. It's maybe, the return of investment would be a different case, even for the banks, if you didn't have fossil fuel subsidies that much and electricity was overtaxed in comparison. So just something I wanted to bring to light, but I'm really sad we don't have time to discuss this further.
But thank you, Julie, so much. Thank you to all the experts, all the speakers for your brilliant ideas and insights. We have a lot to discuss. That's why we have still 2 workshops upcoming. So please join us on the next ones. And just a few takeaways, maybe. There are many challenges for financing positive energy neighborhoods, and especially enabling vulnerable households or SMEs to be part of them. And there's no magic solution, but there are several tips that we can see from Henk, from Belgium, or from Opengela in Basque Country. There are some solutions that work, and this solution always is about bringing trust and engaging the community with one-stop shops and a strong leadership from the local authorities to mediate between the banks and these vulnerable households. And most importantly, with guarantees, as Borja said, I noted this down. €1 in guarantee mobilizes 4 or 5 euros of private finance. So indeed, we need public kind of guarantees and public money to push, but we need to untap the private finance that should go also to vulnerable households. And thank you all for your insights. And of course, there's no magic solution, but I think with this kind of exchanging, we're getting closer to finding together some best practices and some solutions. Thank you all, and all the participants also for your engagement and your cute questions. Have a nice afternoon.
Thanks a lot.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.